This is Annie with Family Homesteading in West Texas, and today we are making bread using only fresh milled flour, and we're doing sourdough. I want to make bread tomorrow, so I'm going to start my sourdough. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon. I'm going to add a 1/3 cup of flour. This is flour that I have milled before, and I'm not sure what kind of wheat it's from, but it doesn't really matter. Anything from the wheat family works for sourdough. And I'm just putting enough water in there so that it's a thick paste. It's nice and thick. And now I'm gonna add a little bit from my starter that I have in the fridge. So I'm always keeping this in the fridge. I will take about a teaspoon of it out, approximately, and add it to this paste that I just made. Give it a good stir. Put a lid on there. I'm not screwing it tight, just lay it on there, and we'll come back to that before I go to bed. Now I also need to feed my starter that I'm putting back into the fridge. There's probably a little more than a teaspoon left in here, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of flour and water, give it a stir, and put it back into the fridge. This will get active in the fridge, but not nearly as fast as it would if I were to leave it out on the counter. So I will put this back into the fridge, and it will be ready there for me next week when I'm wanting to bake again. Okay, so now it is 8:30, and this has started to get bubbles. And I will feed this again. I'm going to put a decent amount of flour in there. And I usually do not measure. I'm just going to put it all in there. And I will make it a pasty sourdough like I did before. And tomorrow morning we should have a nice jar full of bubbles and ready to make a dough. I will probably start tonight to mill the wheat yet, because my grain mill does get too hot if I mill too much at a time, and I make a very big dough, so it's a lot of flour that I need to make. So I will start milling tonight. I will probably mill like half the amount that I need, and then I'll get started tomorrow morning. All right, this is fed, so it's about half a jar full, not quite, and I'll just put the lid on like this and leave it on the counter overnight. We'll have a jar full of bubbles tomorrow morning. I use mostly hard white wheat berries, but I add a little bit of hard red this time. We have a nice jar full of bubbles, very active. That's exciting. So we're ready to start our dough. It is still early, it's about 5:50, everybody else is still sleeping, but this dough takes quite a bit of time. I am doubling the recipe today, but I will put it in the description box below for you. I do 4 cups of hot water, 1.5 cup coconut oil, stir it in a little bit so it'll start melting. I add 4 tablespoons of honey, 2 tablespoons of salt, and I'll add the baking soda at the very last. The coconut oil has melted. So we're going to start adding flour. Actually, I forgot. I'm adding 4 cups of cold water before I start adding flour. I am adding 10 cups of flour at this time. Give it a good stir, but remember this is my recipe that I doubled. Now I'm going to add my sourdough starter. I usually do not measure how much this is, but I'm going to measure it out for you. So it's 3 cups of starter, and I'm just leaving in a little bit in the jar. Since I'll be doing some more baking tomorrow, I want to get another starter going right away. I'll just feed this and then it'll be ready for me tomorrow when I want to do some baking. I mix it in very well. The reason I'm not using like a KitchenAid mixer or something is because I'm making a very big dough and I just knead it by hand. But it does take effort. At this time I am adding 1.5 tablespoons of baking soda. I add baking soda to all my sourdough recipes. It helps with the sour flavor that sourdough has. I mixed the sourdough starter and the baking soda in. Now I will just cover it up and then I will go milk the cow, have breakfast, and then after that I will come back to this. Milking and breakfast is done, so I'm starting with milling more flour. It's about 2 hours later and it has risen. I am seeing some bubbles and a little bit of that stretch when I stir it. So I am adding 2 cups of flour at this time, and then I will just cover it up and let it sit again after I've mixed it in. I was going to go into the garden for an hour, but as always, I took a lot longer. So it's been 2 hours since I put some flour in the dough, so let's get at that. Okay, let's have a look at this. Wow, it's almost to the top, so it's nice and bubbly, and that's what we're looking for. It is active. I'll put 2 more cups in there. And after this, I'm gonna let it set for another hour, and then I'm gonna finish the dough. It's starting to form that nice stretchiness in the dough. Two hours later, I can actually see that the dough is a little bit spongy but still very sticky. I start kneading by hand at this time. I'm sprinkling some flour all over the dough and then I'm pulling away from the side. I added about 3 more cups of flour, but it was still quite sticky, so I'm just sprinkling flour as I knead. What I'm aiming for is when I'm done kneading that I'll have a nice ball, not too terribly sticky. But I'm not too worried about it if it's still a little bit sticky. So I actually waited another hour and a half since it was very sticky earlier and not very stretchy. I gave it a little bit more time and it is a lot more stretchy now. And I'm not going to add a whole lot more flour into it, just a little bit as I need it because I don't want it to stick to my hands too much. And then I will just basically pull from the sides and pull it up. This is the same method as stretch and fold, as some would call it. I'm just flouring it a little bit so that it wouldn't stick. I'm kneading it a little bit and then pull up from the side. Okay, so now we have that spongy feeling on the dough, and that's what we're looking for. So we'll just give it another hour and we'll see how it looks at that time. I never really use a timer. I am just looking at the dough. Do you see what I see? The dough is rising very well, so let's make buns. Okay, so let's start with this. I have decided that I am going to make a loaf of bread, just 1 loaf of bread, and then the rest will be buns. So let's do the loaf first. And I'm using flour to prevent sticking on my hands. You see how spongy and bubbly the dough is? That's exactly what we're looking for. And I will just guess at how big of a piece I need for the loaf. And I'm using a knife to cut it. Okay, and now I am going to stick this loaf in the fridge for a couple of hours. The reason for that is I don't want the loaf and the buns to be ready to bake all at the same time, because then it'll over ferment and it'll go flat. So I'm going to stick this in the fridge and then we'll make the buns. Okay, so we've got the loaf in the fridge, so now we're ready to cut the buns. And I do not weigh the dough. You can, but I just don't take the time to do that. I've done this often enough that I know how the size feels in my hand that I want. So I'm just gonna cut this all up. Okay, I've got them all cut up. So let's start rolling them into balls, and I have learned to do it in my hand to make a nice ball like that. Hands get a little sticky, I just flour them a little bit. So this is where I put my buns and let them rise. The oven is usually warmer than the rest of our house, but since I'm having a big dough, this isn't quite enough space, so I'll show you where else I keep my buns to rise them. And the over-the-stove microwave that never gets used for anything else than rising buns. And I use the stackable cooling racks to stack them up, and it works very well. Okay, it has been just over an hour and a half, and I'm going to take these out and I'm going to turn the bake on 400 and let it preheat, and then we're going to start baking. Okay, let's check our buns. Oh, they're a golden brown, so they're ready to take out. I never watch the time, I just watch when they're golden brown. So when the buns are done, I'm using the same stackable cooling racks that I used to have them in the over the stove microwave to rise them there. And it just works so well because that doesn't take up a lot of space. Okay, so the buns are done. So I'm gonna turn the temperature lower on the oven. I'm gonna go 325, and then I'm gonna take the last batch out, and I'm gonna put the loaf in. It has risen. I think it has doubled in size. And we'll be baking that for about 40 minutes. We'll let them cool, and then we'll bag them up and put them in the freezer. Okay, so these buns are cool now. Let's cut into them. They're super soft. You see those bubbles? They're so very soft and they're so good. This is not a white bread. This is a whole grain. The whole wheat berry is in there, the germ, the bran, everything is in it. So we get all the nutrition. That is a lot of buns, and they're so delicious. So I always keep my buns in the freezer, and when we're ready to eat our buns, I like to defrost them in the toaster oven, and then they'll be nice and crunchy on the outside. I don't know if crunchy is the right word, but I hope you know what I mean. We eat these buns for breakfast with eggs. I like to put a little bit of jam and butter on there. On this particular morning, I have beet jam that I have freshly made from the beets in the garden. We also make hamburgers burgers or grilled cheese sandwiches with them, and it's just so handy to always have bread on hand. Okay, so that is all I have for you today. If you like our content, like, comment, and subscribe below if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye.